So,
Sure.
yeah, man, thanks for joining. And thanks for talking to me today. I'm really excited about your work. We met in person for the first time last summer. Um,
Mhm.
it would be great if you could introduce yourself and tell us like what you're
Sure.
working on.
Sure. So my name is Arvid Roach. I'm a senior industrial designer over here at GE Appliances. And I'm actually on the brand team. We have a new product introduction team, and then we have a brand team. So I work a lot on initiatives, brand-wide initiatives, sort of blue sky thinking for the company. And accessibility is part of that. It's something that we've, I'd say the last year or two, really leaned into as, a growth area for the company. My background, of course, industrial design. Before I came to GE Appliances, I worked at a consultancy in Chicago called Minimal for 6 years, and I think some of my coworkers went off to Microsoft. Uh, Small world. Um, and then I guess I would say, I got into accessibility again because I was part of the brain team. But after um, your talk, I started reading up, and I read a book by, I believe it's Cat
Oh
Holmes,
yeah, yeah, you read Cat's
Mismatch,
book. That's cool.
and
Yeah,
that kind of blew my mind.
yeah,
That's when it all started to shift for me. Is when I started to understand the difference between universal design and inclusive design, and realized that accessible is it's just an attribute of a design. So with that, again, I'm really happy to be talking here, um, and happy to answer any questions.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, yeah, Cat's book came out of the work that we started here at our Microsoft
It's just
process. It's a wonderful book. And she went on to like really kind of enrich the work. So it's really is a sort of a great novel, sort of piece of work. And it's interesting that you said accessibility is an attribute. I think that too. And I think as designers, we're all kind of design is a verb, right? And so many times with the people that we work with and everything, they think of it as like as an object, like design is a thing, right? So I
yeah,
think I think what I really appreciate about what Kat's work and what you just sort of said, like I always like to say accessibility is an outcome, right? And inclusive design
yeah,
are the methods that we do to achieve that outcome. So yeah, it's really interesting to kind of follow up and think about that. But yeah, I'm really excited, uh, like kind of by the work that you do. And I mean, I think the conversations that we had with you and your team, you have something that is so established, right? Like appliances, right? Like everyone has them.
yeah,
We
yeah,
all know what they are. And just watching them evolve as things in the world become more and more digital and what needs to kind of stay the same, like what's tried and true, sort of a measure of quality. And then, how these things evolve in a digital realm. And then you bring in these ideas of how can we adapt things that kind of exist to be more usable for people with disabilities. It becomes really interesting because it's not only about the physical, it's about the digital too, right?
absolutely. And I think about that a lot. That interplay of physical form and digital experience. I do think that we, traditionally and still focus a lot on creating sort of universal designs that a design that everybody can, as many people as possible can use. And we don't think as much around creating, a diversity of experiences with a specific product. It really is for safety reasons and many other reasons. We're really trying to limit and control the interactions, which kind of runs against the idea of inclusiveness. So it's tricky. I think again, everything is very human factors based, and although many of our appliances have digital interfaces, I think in a way they tend to be secondary in the way that for a car, for example, the physical movement of driving is primary. The dashboard or whatever digital elements you have are supporting, I think, that primarily. physical action. Cooking, likewise, I think is primarily a physical action and then supported digitally. Whereas I think, gaming or computing, you could argue, is primarily kind of this digital, and then is supported by the hardware. That software experience is sort of more idea based as opposed to cooking or something like that. So that's, I think, a struggle to get people into a different mindset, because again, everything is just that universal approach as opposed to an inclusive approach.
And I really appreciate that universal, that nature, right? Like I think when you talk about Kat's book, we were coming at it from a place of software being malleable, software not having to have form. And I think the challenges, that I encountered, that you've encountered, is that, our work has form, right? Like, our work is mass produced. So there has to be some thought into this idea of universality. And I think that has changed. It's definitely changed my perception of like this work, because when we started, we were like, software doesn't have to have form. We could do whatever we wanted. But atoms aren't bits, right? Like that's the whole kind of thing. One thing that you just said that I really appreciate, and I kind of want to dig into just a tiny bit because I don't have to deal with it as much as you do, is safety, right? Now, safety, I have this idea of like kind of like a hierarchy of needs when it comes to like these mismatches that we encounter, right? So there's at the sort of base level, there's this idea of like a microaggression, right? Like just whether it's language or assumptions about how something's used, it's not really a full-on barrier. It's more of just a nuisance, right? And then up from that would be like a hassle. I can get around this. I can make do. I can do something else. But then you get to like a full barrier. Like I'm blocked. I can't do this, right? Like I'm unable to do this. But there's something above a barrier, which is safety, right? So in my world, in software, there isn't that much, right? Like computers aren't going to really harm you, but there are examples, right? There are things like photosensitive seizures that can happen where the experiences we create can harm people. But in your world, you're not to make light of it, but you're playing with fire.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I would say definitely safety is the number one concern. We have a really large engineering team, of course, and a lot of their focus is around planning for, all those contingencies, all those things that can go wrong. And I think, again, I do want to back up and say, I do think a lot of, software, especially in the interface, starts to have its, it does have its own form. So I don't think that it's not physical, but rather that it's more open-ended and more flexible, to be updated and change, is more adaptable. Whereas we are focusing so much on hardware, and we can do over-the-air updates, but it's not very common. And so getting it right the first time oftentimes means making assumptions, which is dangerous, but necessary in design. And of course, there are deadlines to everything. So I think there is this limiting factor that comes with safety. I think I'd also just mention that, the stakes for failure, as you said, are high when it comes to getting hurt and liability. But there's also just, when you order an appliance, it's a hassle, right? You have to go on and, first of all, can you even find, or identify that this appliance is accessible through the website? We don't have a little, yes, this is accessible to low vision or, low strength users on our website, on any of our products, unfortunately, at this point. And so the risk in purchasing, of course, and then in moving it, it's a hassle to get a refrigerator into a home. You can't just kind of dropped off at your doorstep. So if it doesn't work, then returning it is a huge hassle. And then, of course, as you mentioned, during use, that's when there's, a major risk of getting hurt or burned, pinching a finger, there's a million things that can go wrong.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
really cool. But I
Also,
mean, you also, how much of all those considerations have been sort of accounted for and sort of, I don't want to say standardized, but like there's just a way of going about things that accounts for those types of considerations. Like, I mean, I'm very impressed by, like, I mean, I've been here at Microsoft for 15 years, and Microsoft's existed for a long time before that. But as far as a design practice, we're still nothing compared to like the heritage that you all have, right? And then so I'm very intrigued by this idea of just kind of the practice knowledge and like the intrinsic sort of things that you do, sort of as part of your work.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have been around for, over 100 years, GE Appliances as an appliance company. And we've been manufacturing at this park here for 70 years. So certainly there is a long history of focusing on safety and reliability and trying to maintain the innovation that's required to keep a company going for that long. I do think, as I said, inclusion is a relatively recent initiative. I think that prior to that, as with most corporations, I think it was all about, more of that standard approach of how do we design for the quote unquote normal person,
Right.
and the most number of features and a lot of personas. I mean, of course, I should back up and say we have different brands. So there's a level of how do we make this exclusive? Not sorry, I should say
No,
that
I know what you
differently.
mean though. Yeah, like
And then
premium,
exclusivity.
right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
that idea of like I am a home chef
Yeah.
and value like a premium
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I guess the way I would put it is, I think, and this is still true today, a lot of companies, and it is a sort of type of diversity, focus on the expert user. If you want to go out and really design something tailored to, an advanced chef or whatever. And that's kind of some of the language that we use for our premium brands. But again, I think there's some similarities there where we are going out and talking to again, non-standard, in quotes, user. And I think that has been the beginning of a shift, or rather a transition into this more inclusive way of designing, is to take those personas that we
Yeah.
have for our different brands and just, dive a little deeper and kind of rethink how we approach that.
I love how you've kind of come to that. I think, in our practice here, we definitely have something similar where you see the needs of a power user. Like, in traditional computing, a power user is someone who just needs to be able to configure their environment to the nth degree for performance. Right? And then you
Yeah.
look at those needs and you look at the needs of the disabled, and they're very aligned, right? Like, I need to configure my environment for performance, right? It's just a so it's interesting to see sort of the ends of the circles kind of meet, I guess, if you will. I think the one thing that we've articulated, which I'm trying to figure out through the whole awareness aspect of this work, is that whereas like a power user in our world is very confident in their ability to like use the system, someone with a disability might not be so confident. And that's because they just might not be aware of like the power that they have, or there is a larger risk to like losing functionality by pushing the envelope, if you will, right? So, that's why you see risk adverse people with disabilities, because they're like, hey, it's not broke, I don't want to fix it. So, but it's a really kind of interesting space to kind of look into, because I do think that we do need to get our disabled customers more confident in the ability to tune a system to their needs. And I mean, that's not just them, that's obviously us too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting you were talking about sort of the research and those power users. And I think it brings to mind this concept that we talk a lot about here called co-creation, or zero distance, to users. We have a whole facility nearby us called First Build, where they engage in co-creation with users, with customers, and so that's really baked into our culture. That's I would say at least 5 or more years we've been really leaning into that as a culture of again reducing the distance between the designer and the end user. And so I think coming along with that has been a lot more focus on empathy, on listening, on doing research that is, more, what's the word, qualitative rather than just give me the huge quantitative data set. And I like that, as a designer. I think that's already yielded big dividends.
Yeah. And I mean, that's amazing. I mean, the principle of nothing about us without us in the disability community, that inherently means that we are trying to engage in co-creation all the time. Like I'm outside the Inclusive Tech Lab. That's what this facility is for here at Microsoft, right? And we can always strive to do better there. I don't think we will ever be, I don't think we'll ever nail it. I think it's a constant journey. But that's really, really interesting how you kind of how you all come about it. And I think I also appreciate the qualitative versus quantitative insight, because I think one of the things that we deal with a lot here is we're trying to synthesize need by talking to users in these more ethnographic, qualitative kind of sessions. Quantitative, for a lot of disabilities, when you're talking about interaction design, I don't really find it that useful. And so what I mean by that, like, let me just give you the example. So I always give this example. Like, if I bring in like 5 users who have cerebral palsy, right? And I present 3 options to them, and 3 of them pick option A, and one of them picks option B, and one of them picks option C. I think traditional product making would be like, well, option A is the winner. But because of the vast sort of ways that cerebral palsy presents itself, like, everyone with cerebral palsy is unique. If you've met one person with cerebral palsy, you've met one person with cerebral palsy. So it isn't about picking which of the options is right. It's about understanding the attributes of the 3 different options of A, B, and C, and then coming up with D, E, and F, right? Through co-creation, to try to get to a place where people can find something that really kind of fits them. So that whole notion of quantitative as a way to sort of filter down is, I don't really find it that useful.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, again, we are, I think, primarily an engineering driven company. Although, of course, we have a pretty robust design team. And so it is always a little bit of an uphill battle to explain that, necessity of a designer at the end of the day, the necessity of somebody to, go out, listen, and then kind of translate or synthesize those insights. And that there's no shortcut where you just, look at people as numbers and then spit out some result. So I totally agree. And I think that whole kind of quantifying, grouping people, for lack of a better word, into it's just such a wrong way of looking at it. I mean, although I guess that's too strong to say it's a wrong way, but I think that it's in a way possibly an antiquated way of really lumping people into groups and saying, okay, have we considered the quote unquote group with the special needs, and how do we adapt to that? And it's just not, again, the right way to look at it. I think you have to go one by one, as you said, and treat people as individuals and pull out the meaningful insights and apply them creatively, right? It's creativity. That's really what underscores a lot of design.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's definitely parts in my world where there's multivariate testing, like A/B testing, where it is like A/B, right? Which one's better? Which one performs better? But definitely as a designer, synthesis is a skill that I think we don't, as a practice enough. Whether there's convention or design systems or patterns or what have you, to really kind of get at something new, you have to engage in synthesis. And it's also I completely understand why, to like more analytical professions like research and engineering, synthesis just looks like daydreaming. But
Sure. It's sort of a different language,
yeah.
And I think the default language is to speak in a PowerPoint with facts and numbers and statistics that kind of ladder up. And logical arguments are wonderful. That's the foundation of everything we do. I'm not against that. It's just more, I think sometimes there's this belief that that's enough, and it's really not enough. It takes out the human element, I feel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it takes them out, and you miss opportunities to like enrich those human elements, right? Like a reductive process is never gonna, I'm trying to think of a cooking metaphor, like make it richer, but I'm not coming up with anything. But yeah, no, that's really cool. Very cool. So, I mean, when I visited in June, I think it was June, there was so much really interesting stuff that you showed me. And some of it was, not to sort of give anything away, but there was like some designs that you had that were sort of tried and true, that looked like they would like a knob on a stove, right? That didn't look any different than what I would have expected. But there was subtleties of the shape and the tactility of the affordances on the knob that really gave someone who is, say, blind, this ability to really understand this knob in a way that that they wouldn't have had in a typical stove. But at the same time, it was almost invisible to, like, if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't really have noticed it. So I really appreciated that level of sort of seamless integrated design of tactility into these controls and sort of functions of your appliances. It's just really wonderful. How have you guys been digging into that?
Yeah, thank you. That has been definitely a broad push in the design team specifically to try and include more tactile elements just baked in, right, to the product. And they can be very subtle. I mean, we're not at least permanently on the product including Braille for every single label, but just the idea of being able to find these tactile landmarks is a huge step up and can help differentiate buttons in an interface. So we're trying to roll that out. Of course, we make thousands and thousands of products, so there's so much that needs to be kind of retrofitted, and that's why we've talked about this Braille kit that we've been working on, this tactile sticker kit that we will launch at the end of this month, and that's going to be a really comprehensive solution to trying to, again, retrofit previous and future appliances with these both Braille translations, but also unique tactile symbols that can be differentiated. So we're really excited about that. Again, long-term, retrofitting things is not the ideal solution. You want to have inclusive design, as early as possible in that design process. And that's in the design team now, but as you know, with big companies, you have to break walls down and kind of get into the other groups, whether it's engineering or marketing or brand, and start to teach these ideas about inclusivity.
And I believe you worked with American Printing House for the Blind on this. It'd be interesting to understand your journey, because you mentioned Braille, and I suspect that at one point you were probably like, oh, well, we'll Braille label everything, until you realize, oh my gosh, that would take like these
Yeah,
like augmentations would be like 10 miles long.
absolutely. And I mean, this has been a learning process for myself and for many on the team in terms of just how many people can actually read Braille. Not a majority of blind people, right? So we've had to question some of these initial assumptions. And fortunately, we've had the time to conduct research and go talk to blind people, people with low vision, and listen to them and understand, show them prototypes and understand how best to solve these problems. So yes, the working with APH, again, a bit of background on them. They are, I think, either the exclusive or certainly the largest uh, producer of Braille in the U.S. They make, I think, virtually 100% of the Braille textbooks that are used in schools. And they've been around, I think, 160 years at this point, before the Civil War. And they're local here in Louisville, so we are tremendously lucky to have them here to partner with. They're a great resource. Of course, they employ a lot of blind people who we can go and talk with, test with, and they've been, again, invaluable in this process. Also, Central High, a local school where they teach blind and low vision high schoolers, and the Kentucky School for the Blind, of course. So we're really lucky to be situated right in a spot to do research. And they've been a wonderful partner, and they're making the kit for us that again will launch soon.
Yeah, and I think what I'm really, there's an aspect of that partnership that I'm really excited about. When we did our surface adaptive kit, we did it on our own. We did our research. We worked with the community, but we don't have the sort of organizational knowledge to follow through marketing, communication, and support. It's not that I'm saying that our marketing teams aren't good at this. It's just I'm really excited by like the fact that APH is involved and how it will. I'm wondering how it will foster a community of use, right? Like no one, we don't. As far as I know, the people who use the Surface Adaptive Kit, there's no chat rooms or forums anywhere that people are discussing how to use the the adaptive our product. But I think that will happen with yours, right? Because it is something that is so needed by the community, that I really feel like it's going to get to a place where you'll get a lot of feedback a lot more quickly, and it will come to you, as opposed to like having to go find it.
Yes, and that is our hope. Really, is that by having that connection to many of the the resources, especially educational resources, the people who are kind of leaders in that community, that we will have a good path to get this product into the hands of the people who would want it, which I think is always a struggle, how to get the word out. And so I think we're really excited about that. I think I should also mention, again, we've taken huge inspiration from the adaptive sticker kit, and I think in some ways we've just wanted to take that and apply it a little more specifically to appliances. In terms of if you have a dishwasher or a clothes washer, having more specific symbols, or again, it doesn't come with Braille translations for all those words as well. Trying to create that one kit where you can label everything in the home was part of our primary mission. And just so many more buttons in a home than there are on a computer.
No, absolutely. And the nuance of those buttons is a lot different too, right? Like, it's like you said, like if there's a keyboard, we're just trying to give you an additional affordance to give you confidence that you're going to hit the button that you want to hit. And that's different than I think what you guys are doing. Like, you need that confidence. You need it for use. You need it for safety. But the variety, the uniformity of like a QWERTY keyboard just isn't in what you're describing, right? So I really do appreciate it. I think think it's exciting, the work
Yeah,
you're all doing.
absolutely. And you mentioned safety, and I know we already talked a little bit about that, but I can't emphasize it. That's really been a majority of the development has been trying to figure out uh, sort of the legal implications of labeling an appliance that if you put a sticker on it that means this thing, you're now implying that this appliance is accessible
Oh,
to a blind
interesting.
person. And what are the legal implications that come along with that? So that's taken a lot of thought. That's something we have to carefully navigate. And it is, it's frustrating at times because clearly we're trying to do a good thing here, right? But of course we have to do it in the right way. So yeah, sometimes it's really hard to do simple things. I'm sure you understand.
Oh no, absolutely. And then I think, it's a double-edged sword working at basically a company like yours that's an institution, right? Like you don't have the privilege of moving fast and breaking things, right? You have to,
Exactly.
you have responsibility, and we do too. So, I think I just appreciate that even more. I totally get what you mean. I think, if there are any sort of young designers who are watching this, that's going to be a weird awakening. The stuff they don't teach you in school, right? They don't teach you the monotonous stuff in school. you know.
Yeah. 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 No, that's exactly right. I think I have had to learn some of the again, legal ramifications of, if this doesn't have a choking hazard warning on it, $100,000 per unit fines. I mean, it's crazy. Some of the rules, but again, it's necessary and they're all there for a reason. So, I do respect that.
I mean, in our inclusive design methodology in Kat's book, that principle of solve for one, extend to many. The last line is constraints are a beautiful thing, and that goes in many different ways, right? Like, we all have constraints, we craft within these constraints and they, in many ways, they sharpen our skills, right? It makes the problem, it's just another thing to synthesize.
That's true. And I mean, that's the fun of design at the end of the day, I think, is try to solve those difficult problems in unique ways. I do think, again, back to the sort of physical, digital, ultimately, of course, they're one, they should be integrated, but I do wonder sometimes of which is more difficult.
I don't know.
That I do feel, in a way, our job here is pretty straightforward. Again, because of the nature, I guess, of what we do, cooking and cleaning and air and water. These are very kind of elemental activities, right? What's the word? They've been around a long time, right? We've been cooking over fires for a millennia or more, and so the room, the room to innovate, I think it's tougher, right? There's always room to innovate, but I think it's very competitive in terms of us versus the competition and what's this year's feature. But in other ways, again, it's simpler, I think, from an interaction standpoint, certainly than something more open-ended in computing.
I mean, I think a lot of what it's interesting that digital, physical, which is more difficult. I don't know if that has an answer, but I feel like the answer is, well, when you do both together, that's more difficult. Like, it's a lot easier to do either or, like at the same time, but when you're trying to do them both together, that's more difficult. And honestly, that is what sort of prompted this whole exploration that I've been doing, this thing to reach out to you all, is to find people who work in both and sort of build a community of design that recognizes that both exist in harmony. The vast majority of digital accessibility communities, like, they don't think about the device, really. And I think, and I
Hey,
think, and that's not a criticism. I think it's just a sort of a framing. I think another thing in my work anyway, you know, a lot of people work in accessibility, but very few people work in building assistive technology, which is what I do. So, people make things work people make things work to use in things like screen readers or magnifiers. We make screen readers and magnifiers. So,
yeah,
it is slightly different. I mean, it's obviously all related. It's obviously all the same community. You're trying to achieve the same goals, but there is nuance, right? And I think anyone who builds these sort of complete products, right? There is definitely a higher bar. Like the end to end experience of physical and digital is a high bar.
yeah. I, if something you said a moment ago prompted a question, I remember at the end of Kat's book, she kind of talked about, I guess it was it was a discussion of biases that we all have as human beings, and it was talking, I think, about how as AIs and machine learning become more common, are we going to build in our biases and almost reinforce these negative biases, our stereotypes, and the groupthink, or the again inverse out kind of mentality. And I guess the question is here, in appliances, everything. We just launched AI assisted and Smart HQ, which is our basically our app across all our cooking brands, and you can ask it about your appliance, and it knows all the manuals and will just give you plain English answer. And so I think we all have this tremendous sense of optimism around finally voice is going to be really useful. You can actually speak to your appliances in a natural way. And there's, nothing but upsides to this. And I wondered, have you changed your mind around sort of some of the caution around these biases that Kat was talking about?
Yeah.
Or is that still a concern?
No, I think it's always a concern. But I don't fall into the trap of thinking it's all doom and gloom. I think a lot of the disability community is really worried about those biases, and they should be, and we should be thinking about it kind of constantly. But you've probably used these systems. You can tell it who you are. So when you talk about using AI like you are, and I think it comes back to this idea of like there isn't one user, right? So when you create these systems, you can give like maybe a little bit of like, well, who are you? And then that'll help me give you the answer that you need, right? So yeah, if you come into like an experience like what you're describing, I think it would be great to say like, hey, by the way, I'm blind, right? And so you're going to need to explain things to me, like understanding that I'm blind. And I do believe that we're going to start to see this really open up really quickly, because once the system figures out how to do that, it can do it 100 different times or different ways, and it can adapt quicker than we can. So I'm an optimist in all of this. I only see the upside. Like, I mean, sorry, I don't only see the upside. There's, it's like anything that we do. You do have to be aware. I mean, it's funny, image generation right now, there's a lot of talk about image generation and not wanting to create imagery that is abusive or just bad. But what's funny is I keep trying to, part of the work that I'm doing involves people with Down syndrome. So I'm trying to actually have sometimes these systems create pictures of people with Down syndrome, and it thinks I'm being malicious, and I'm not. So, there's certain guardrails that are put up, like, and what it's doing is it's telling me no. And so, which is fine. I mean, I can appreciate the guardrails. I mean, better to be safe than have something out in the world that is toxic and harmful. But there's different types of exclusion, right?
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't, I think, whereas a lot of people in the community are worried about a bad representation of the disability community in an AI system, I worry that the industry might respond to that by kind of eliminating those queries. And for me, that feels like erasure as opposed to inclusion. And, I mean, okay, I think about this stuff a lot, and I want to kind of be clear that that's just my thought. I'm sure there's tons of safety people and people who think about this that have their own opinions on it, but that's just partly how I think about it.
That's a very interesting observation, and I think, as you said, I mean, these are new technologies, and I think everyone in the industry is still trying to figure out what are the impacts going to be, what are those unforeseen effects, like the one you mentioned. And I guess, this is not really a fully formed thought, but it does make me wonder about, I guess, the sort of cycles of technology where, for example, I feel with screens, the touch screens that are becoming more and more common on cooking appliances, or all appliances really, that was a hot new technology and still, is more and more prevalent. And then, of course, caused lots of problems for blind people who, don't have a static interface anymore. So it's sort of like this one the technology comes in and then it causes problems. But then now with AI and with the, voice controls, okay, we're starting to solve some of those things. Maybe that comes with its own set of problems. And it's just this cycle of you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. But again, I'm optimistic. It's all forward progress.
Yeah, no, and I think what you're getting at is really important. It's kind of vital to our work, and it is vital to sort of this whole notion of not one size fits all, right? Like, okay, you might have a touch screen that has a contextual interface, which is going to be really good for someone who doesn't want to get overwhelmed by information. Where it's like, well, what are the options in this particular moment that I can focus on? So I think that would be good. But then you're absolutely right. It's not learnable by someone who's blind, who there's no tactility there. So what is the modality change? Like you said, like maybe it's interacting with like an AI agent. And so it's just a different type of interaction to achieve the same goal. And so I think, that's going to get really, I mean, it's going to get rocky before it gets better, but I do think it's the right way to go.
For sure. I think if there's a sort of a lesson to take away from all of it, and this is certainly not my idea, but it's just increasing the number of ways to interact with an object. So in that sense, as you said, when you have an AI that's tailored to you, there's a million ways that can interact with you. That's wonderful. When you have the option to speak to your device, to push a button, to control it from your phone, you're just expanding the inputs and you're allowing for, again, a greater diversity of experiences. The only tricky part is at the end of the day, the outcome is, you have to have your lasagna cooked at the right temperature. We have to ensure not too many outcomes,
right?
But too many different experiences.
Super cool. Well, it's been great talking, and I hope we should talk more often. But this has been wonderful, and I really want to thank you. And I'm very excited by the work you all will be releasing. This video will not come out until after you release it because that's I don't know spoilers. But it's really exciting. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.